nasty weather got the little monsters uptight. Make it a blockbuster night. Blockbuster has something for everyone. Even the fussiest little beasts settle down to enjoy Blockbuster. I just love a family night. If the weather's a fright, make it a Blockbuster night.
Whenever the question, what's your favorite horror movie franchise, comes up, there's a lot of options to choose from. You could select something from the 1980s, or something that has a lot of gore to it. For me personally, I gotta go with something that's been around with me ever since I was a kid and adored it since. And that is the Universal Studios Monsters franchise. When Universal Studios was established in 1915, Carl Laemmle turned his attention to making movies. However, it wasn't him that got the horror movie trend started, but his son Julius, who would later change his name legally to Carl Laemmle Jr. Once Jr. was put in charge of the studio's production output, he wanted to break the mold by putting some horror films into production. Among the notable are 1923's The Hunchback of Notre Dame, 1925's Phantom of the Opera, and 1928's The Man Who Laughs. It was these movies that would carry over similar elements, like a leading monster star, in this case Lon Chaney, who was expressive and acrobatic, sympathetic Beauty and the Beast style plot lines, and classic tropes like the angry, torch-wielding mob. While his father was not a fan of these flicks, Laemmle couldn't deny their popularity and box office success. However, something happened within that time.
Wait a minute, you ain't heard nothing yet. Wait a minute, I tell you, you ain't heard nothing.
The emergence of sound films ushered Universal into a brand new era of filmmaking, the likes of which audiences would be treated to vampires, werewolves, man-made monsters, and other creatures alike they have never seen. At least that time frame. So, after all these years, why are the Universal monsters still popular? Well, that's what we're here to investigate about. We'll take a look at the classics, the sequels, the trends that happened in between, and take a look at the legacy beyond to see just why these monsters are celebrated and remembered as they are. And there's no better place to begin than the one that started it all.
It's alive!
1931 gave us Todd Browning's Dracula, the story of Transylvania's resident vampire that moves from London and seeks fresh victims from the street. For the time, its production was ambitious for being the first sound adaptation of Bram Stoker's novel.
There are far worse things waiting man than death.
Due to the Great Depression, a grander version was scaled back to minimal sets, yet there's something about the simplicity that is effective. Even if it lacks a musical score, there's an ominous presence in the atmosphere given the gothic set design helps the mood. Of course, what retains this movie's fame is Bela Lugosi as Count Dracula, a part he played prior on the Broadway play this film also took source from. Originally, Laemmle Jr. hoped to get Lon Chaney for the part, but the actor sadly passed away of throat cancer. Lugosi lobbied hard for the role, even going as far to accept a low paycheck. Without a doubt, it's hard to imagine any other actor here. When you hear that deep Hungarian accent and see that hypnotic gaze, you immediately think Dracula.
My blood now flows through her veins. She will live through the centuries to come.
Other notable parts include Edward Van Salone as Van Helsing, who can be a little stiff at times.
As far as we know, Doctor. But you tell me that he escapes from his room. He's gone for hours.
Also memorable is Dwight Fry as Dracula's assistant Renfield, who was over-exaggerated, but in the right ways.
Rats. Rats. Thousands. Millions of them.
Look at that wide-eyed grin and stare, it just sends creepy vibes already. It's funny to note that Dracula's marketing didn't focus on the horror aspect, but sold the movie more as a romance. Well, Dracula was released around Valentine's Day, and one can only imagine those who use this as a dating opportunity. Dracula was a box office success, and it's still well received to this day. Some might be off-put by the slow pace and quiet lack of musical score ambience at times, but it was the monster movie that pioneered many to come, and its lasting impact cannot be ignored. Coming off the success of Dracula, Lugosi was delighted to hear that Laemmle Jr. wanted to adapt another monster novel to the big screen. He went in thinking he was going to get the role of the Doctor, but was rather dismayed to find out that they wanted him as the monster instead. One failed screen test later, under the supervision of director Robert Florey, and Laemmle Jr. had that all replaced under the supervision and creative will of director James Whale. For he wanted someone more interesting to fill the monster's shoes. And that actor's name was Boris Karloff. Ah yes, Frankenstein. This was the movie I remember watching a lot as a kid, and it still holds up after all these years. It's a simple story of a doctor that wishes to challenge mortality by making a creature out of various human body parts, and succeeds. However, the Doctor's joy goes downhill when he discovers the brain his creation carries violent tendencies, and eventually leads to the creature's escape and rampage. Much like with Dracula, this adaptation takes source from the Mary Shelley novel and a stage play by Peggy Webling. While the vampire flick before broke new ground, Frankenstein perfected it, and not just with improved camera work and extra sets to boot. You had Colin Clive as the Doctor himself, who seeks to challenge life and death by pursuing his dangerous experiment. Clive is the real star here. One look at him and you know he's serious about his work.
A moment ago, you said I was crazy. Tomorrow we'll see about that.
That's not to say Boris Karloff as the monster is overshadowed here. He gets a lot of solid moments too. We know Frankenstein's creation is powered by an abnormal brain, yet it's interesting to see the amount of emotion and empathy Karloff gives under all that makeup. Sure, he can be scary, but he later shows a sense of sympathy when he's trying to bond with a little girl named Maria. Yeah, let's just say it doesn't end so well. Another notable talent behind the scenes was makeup artist Jack Pierce, who would be a major help to future monster films. When creating the monster design, Pierce was very detailed to give a look that was realistic and horrific at the same time. Small details, like the famous neck bolts, are really electrodes that explain how the monster would obtain the needed electricity to be resurrected. This movie carries all the famous staples for future Frankenstein films, like laboratory sets and even a hunchback assistant named Fritz, played by Dwight Fry. It's funny how folks think Igor was the first, but he wouldn't show up until a little later. Upon release in November 1931, Frankenstein was open to critical and box office success, but it wasn't without controversy. The movie contains scenes that were considered too shocking for audiences back then, even if viewed somewhat tame by today. The two biggest moments that got hit hard was the scene where the creature innocently kills Maria by accident, and a line by Frankenstein that was viewed as blasphemous.
Name of God, now I know what it feels like to be God.
This would lead to the film to be either banned or edited by state censorship boards, given this was before the Hays Code was ever established. Thankfully, the movie has been restored to its original format and can be enjoyed as well as thrilled by many. Its non-stop action pace can be felt, and you can see why this one brought so much life to the monster franchise. With Boris Karloff established as a monster man in the Hollywood community, his next venture would show off his verbal skills more with 1932's The Mummy. Inspired by the opening of King Tut's tomb, as well as its curse, the story centers on the discovery of a mummified high priest named Imhotep that is awakened and seeks to be reunited with his lost love. He discovers the soul of the princess he desires is reincarnated in the body of a young woman named Helen, and he tries to bring his lost love back into her. If you're expecting a slasher-style film, that's not exactly what this is. This Mummy riles its scares more on ideas, given Imhotep is condemned to be buried alive when he tries to resurrect his dead lover. Just the thought alone of being in a casket and buried under mountains of sand or dirt is just enough to make your skin crawl. It also plays a lot on the theme of reincarnation. Imhotep convinces Helen she is the ancestor of the deceased princess, and it makes you wonder what other past lives she could have had. Supposedly, there was an extended flashback that showed Imhotep and Helen seen in different lives over the centuries. Perhaps the most notable is a moment set in ancient Rome, where she's portrayed as a martyr that is set to be fed to the lions. While the footage is lost, this little infamous piece of trivia remains well known to this day. You see, director Carl Freund did not get along with Zita Joanna, who plays the character Helen, as she wanted certain takes to be shot in a certain manner and certain scenes done under her direction. The director did not get along so well and had little tiny signs of this in very small ways, including not providing her own personal chair. This would prove even further when filming the scene in ancient Rome, when she had to pit herself against a great deal of lions in the studio. Camera and crew were all safely placed in cages, but she wasn't. Oh, and to twist the knife even further, this was the last day of filming, and director Freund wanted it that way to get back at her. Damn. If that's not revenge on a silver platter, I don't know what else is. There's no way you could do anything like that today. Well, unless you're with the Jackass crew.
Oh my God.
Talk to it, Aaron. Try to calm it down. Oh no, it's going for the salmon. Oh no.
Hi, Bear.
Zita wasn't the only one under torture, given Karloff had to wear this elaborate Jack Pierce makeup that consisted of cotton, collodion, and spirit gum on his face, clay to his hair, and wrapped in linen bandages, dipped in acid and cooked in an oven. The application took 9 hours to apply, and the scenes are filmed between 7 p.m. to 2 a.m. On top of that, it took 2 whole hours to remove the stuff. It's ironic to think such complex makeup detail was seen very little of in the opening, but only to have less elaborate makeup used for the rest of the movie. On a lighter side, the Mummy is well acted and worth your time seeing. Karloff gets to show off the power of his voice and delivers his lines in a poetically engaging yet melancholy manner.
Not until you are about to pass through the great night of terror and triumph, until you are ready to face moments of horror for an eternity of love.
I also like the detail in his face when he starts to look more human, despite some of the bandage marks being a little bit visible on the lips. It might not be for everyone who wants a more faster-paced entry, but that's what the Mummy sequels are for, and we'll get to them very soon. Perhaps the most uniquely diverse of the monsters is the Invisible Man. Based on the novel by H.G. Wells, Jack Griffin is a scientist that creates a formula that causes him to be hidden from the all-seeing eye and goes demented with power.
Why? Why do it, Griffin? Just a scientific experiment at first. Suddenly I realized the power I held. The power to rule, to make the world grovel at my feet.
While James Whale was in the directing chair, Boris Karloff turned down the role due to a contract dispute. Director Whale suggested Claude Rains, and honestly, I think he went in the better direction here. Even if Rains is a voice with some physical presence, his take on Griffin completely sells the mad scientist role. It's over-exaggerated at times, but it's fitting for the movie.
Power to make multitudes run, squealing in terror at the touch of my little invisible finger. Even the moon's frightened of me.
You hear that, Moon? Go fuck yourself! I wave my invisible middle finger at your crater face, you galactic asshole! dickhead.
There are even moments when Griffin can be sympathetic, which makes him out to be a tragic figure.
Flora. Why, yes, of course.
I had to tell him you were back, Griffin. Flora was nearly mad with anxiety.
How could I forget?
The scene when he reveals his invisibility to the people in the pub is by far the most iconic and enjoyable reveal.
Look, he's all eaten away.
Huh? How do you like that, eh?
Speaking of which, for 1933 and to this day, the special effects still look remarkable. Outside of having props being held up by wires, a special process was used where Raines or a stunt double would be dressed in black while holding an object or wearing clothes, with the footage filmed behind a black background. The shots would be keyed out and added over the scene. If there were any errors in the process, it would need to be corrected by hand on each frame. And we're talking 64,000 individual celluloid frames here of special effects. The Invisible Man also incorporates James Whale's small dose of comedy in the right spots when required. Some of it works.
A present from the Invisible Man. Money, 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 money. Up and down the city road.
And some of it doesn't. Clearly says a lot when Una O'Connor is quite annoyingly over the top compared to how over-exaggeratedly entertaining Claude Rains can be. Also, is it just me or do all the policemen here seem exhausted for some reason?
Jaffers, what do you think?
He's invisible. That's what's the matter with him.
Well now, I reckon we picked the wrong day to take our Valium together. Still, for a special effects marvel that came out the same year as King Kong, it shows that 1933 was a great year for horror movies. Before we continue on to our next monster, here's a little tiny bit of history for historical context. By 1936, the first horror cycle of Universal came to an end. The Laemmles lost control of the studio over financial difficulties, and thus new ownership moved right in. Dubbed the New Universal, these new owners, Charles Rogers and J. Cheever Cowden, had zero interest in making horror movies and wanted to make straight-up dramas like Night Key. However, something interesting happened. 1 year later, Rogers and Cowden reissued the original Dracula and Frankenstein on a double bill for quick cash. The result was an unexpected hit that it made the new head of production realize how important horror movies were for Universal. Thus, the second horror cycle came into play, with a whole new wave of movies and sequels that kicked off with The Son of Frankenstein, The Invisible Man Returns, and The Mummy's Hand. In between all that, some new monsters were introduced. First up was 1941's The Wolfman. It's interesting because this wasn't Universal's first foray into lycanthropy. 1935 gave us Werewolf of London, where Henry Hall played a botanist that comes across a rare flower and gets bitten by a werewolf that turns him into one. The movie itself is far different from what we would get down the road, given it depicts the werewolfism akin to a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde scenario. Also, it's kind of a slow sit from time to time with some odd places of humor. Like, do we really need to focus on these two English crones when there's a werewolf on the loose?
What's going on here? He grips me, swipes me, swats me one in the bread basket and slams the door in my face. Do you call that a gentleman?
That was so funny I forgot to laugh. Ha! There's also some connection between these two werewolf movies, albeit in the makeup department. Henry Hole was not pleased with the original design by Jack Pierce because the script called to have key characters recognize him, despite being covered in fur. Hall found this a major story problem. Pierce tried a different design that exposed more facial features, but Hall was still not pleased and even convinced studio heads to tone down the makeup. This annoyed Jack Pierce so much that he refused to work on Hall, causing the actor to make his own look for the movie. Given Henry Hall was a talented makeup artist himself. Thankfully, Pierce and Hall would work together on Great Expectations, but Werewolf of London would end up not being a box office hit or a critical one either. The good news is that one of the original makeup designs would later be used to turn Lon Chaney Jr. into a bona fide wolf man. Speaking of which, 1941's Wolf Flick is the one that set the standard for so many others. The tale of innocent Lawrence Talbot, who visits his family home in Wales, but ends up getting bitten by a wolf. As it turns out, the K9 was really a werewolf, and its bite passes a curse to poor Talbot, who seeks to find its cure.
A werewolf can be killed only with a silver bullet, or a silver knife, or a stick with a silver handle.
And otherwise I can never die?
Who said that? Sure you can die. You want to die?
No, I want to live.
This is easily one of my favorite of the Monster Batch. From the atmospheric sets, the chilling music, it is by far one of Universal Studios' best. The biggest driving force here is Lon Chaney Jr. in the lead. That's right, the son of Lon Chaney, who was the Monster Man of Universal's silent era. Chaney Jr. really makes you feel a lot of sympathy for this guy, and I like how after he gets bitten, you can just see his timid expressions that he knows something is off.
I killed Baylor. I killed Richardson. If I stay around here much longer, you can't tell who's gonna be next. You wouldn't want to run away with a murderer, would you?
Oh, Larry, you're not. You know you're not.
As ironic as this movie is, would you believe that you never see a shot of the full moon or full man-to-wolf facial transformation? Granted, there is a wolf-to-man makeup transition near the end, but there is a possible reason behind that as to why it came in so late. The movie was originally meant to be a psychological thriller, with the werewolf aspect played to be ambiguous, with the Wolfman only seen once at the end. Even more strange is that Lawrence's reason for visiting the old Talbot estate in the original script was not for family reasons. In fact, he was supposed to be a technician hired to fix the telescope and was named Larry Gill.
In fact, I've done quite a little work with astronomical instruments, but when it comes to theory, I'm pretty much of an amateur.
I don't know the purpose behind these script-to-screen changes, but I feel it was for the best. It may seem unbelievable to some given he's supposed to be the offspring of his British dad, played by Claude Rains, but I feel it adds to Larry's character more. This brings Larry out of his comfort zone more by having an American character feel out of place in an English setting and indifferent to certain traditions and superstitions. And it's no wonder the Wolfman was the only monster to be played by the same actor. There's no one else other than Chaney Jr. who could do this role so well. It was a big hit for Universal, and it remains a memorable one to this day. On the flip side, there's 1943's Phantom of the Opera, a Technicolor sound remake of the 1925 film. What I find interesting is how this entry often gets overlooked a lot. Not too many people talk about it, and even some single DVD reissues carry the same disc from 2000. This is strange given the movie was a box office hit and won an Oscar for both art direction and cinematography, but it has been relegated to near obscurity. Even some of the books I used for research on this episode don't mention it, or little at all. And after seeing it for this Halloween special, I can see why. It is just dull and not very engaging. The only positive I can give is that this is probably one of the earliest adaptations of Gaston Leloux's novel that gives the titular character a tragic backstory. Claude Rains is violinist Eric Claudin that is trying to get a piano concert published while under financial trouble. After submitting it to a publisher, Eric hears no response, but he mistakes a private performance of his material as the publisher planning to steal his work when they actually want to endorse it. A scuffle results in his face being disfigured, and we don't see him again until 56 minutes into the movie. I am not kidding! Most of the time the story is focused on this love triangle between love interest soprano Christine Dubois, Inspector Raoul, and baritone Anatole. Honestly, I could care less about the back and forth as the Phantom's backstage interference is often minimalized for long scenes of opera performances and that annoying love story. Even more troubling is how originally Eric and Christine were originally going to be family related, with Eric being the father. But it was ejected for being too incestuous. For me, it still comes off uncomfortable given the age difference between these two characters. It's established earlier that Eric was secretly funding Christine's singing lessons, explaining why he's in financial ruin. However, that still doesn't change how disturbing this feels, given a middle-aged man is obsessive over young talent here. Later versions would somewhat rectify that element, most notable Andrew Lloyd Webber's take. I do appreciate that the unmasking moment is kept as a surprise for the tail end, but even the Jack Pierce makeup feels scaled back here. Legend has it that Claude Rains didn't want the makeup work to be too ghastly, and it just looks unimpressive here. This just makes the disfigurement of the Phantom and the Hammer horror adaptation look more unique by comparison. You know, it's funny in hindsight, the original 1925 Phantom had production issues, even right down to the original movie getting reshot with a different director and get re-edited 3 times before release. Yet, that one became a big hit. This one had minor scuffles during production, poor test screenings, mixed reception, yet it did well at the box office. My only guess is the gimmick of seeing a Universal monster movie in color is probably what made it a success. Overall, I can see why many skipped this one, and it's my unfortunate regret to say, it rightfully deserves so. Instead, check out the original silent version from 1925 with Lon Chaney, or the Hammer horror take from 1962 with Herbert Long. And even if the latter is more engaging, despite some strange choices like giving the Phantom a lackey that does his murderous bidding, it goes without saying that it's best to be entertained, as opposed to be frustrated. Now, I could go a little deeper and cover some of the other monsters that appear in this time, like, say, the Wild Ape Woman, or Ondo the Brute Man, and of course the Inner Sanctum films, but that'd be overdoing it for newcomers. I want to focus more on the main entourage of Universal's monsters, and I don't want to overdo it for those that are completely new to this. It's a shame because those creatures and features didn't quite go as iconic as Dracula, Frankenstein, the Wolfman, the Invisible Man, and what have you, but I still say they're worth seeking nonetheless. Though original monsters weren't the only thing that kept this franchise alive, in order to keep the blood going, they also had one other thing injected too. Sequels. We're going to take a quick intermission. When we come back, we're going to see how the long-lasting legacy was continued with a whole wave of storylines and unique crossovers. Stay tuned.
Is this your favorite movie, Ronald?
Sure. It always makes me laugh. Makes me cry.
Look.
Ooh.
A monster is eating its face.
That's not supposed to happen. Come on, I have an idea. 301 cheeseburger Happy Meals to go. 300 for the monster. And 1 for you.
Thanks, Ronald. Ronald makes it better.
Next to my big kitty, I adore the big taste of chocolate in this little Hershey's Kiss. Quiet, Woodrow.
For the big taste you can't resist, it's the big taste of chocolate in a little Hershey's Kiss.
Next to my big friend, I love the big taste of chocolate in this little Hershey's Kiss.
Hershey's Kisses, the little kiss with the big taste.
Hey, pretty funny movie, huh?
What are you, a nut? This is scary.
Scary? This isn't scary. If you want horror, you gotta go with the classics. Dracula, Frankenstein, the Wolfman.
Ooh.
Spooky, huh?
Oh, they're cool. I could send one to my mother.
You'd mail these? These are special edition. You're really starting to freak me out.
Special edition stamps now at the post office. Some stamps you just can't lick.
It's interesting to note how some of the Universal monsters here had its own set of follow-ups, and even at times would cross over with each other. Some of the sequels presented here would follow one long narrative, or they would just be inconsistent. Though, not every monster that had its sequel really needed to be one long narrative. First up is the Dracula sequels, given there's not too many of them. Interestingly, the first sequel the Count got wouldn't be until 1936, with Dracula's Daughter, a direct continuation of the first movie. In fact, it literally picks up where the first one ended, with Van Helsing defeating Dracula. Even Edward Van Salone came back as the Vampire Slayer, and I think his performance is an upgrade from the first film.
Who can define the boundary line between the superstition of yesterday and the scientific fact of tomorrow?
While Bella's nowhere in sight, despite an infamous tale where he was paid $4,000 for his aborted cameo, Gloria Holden takes center stage as Countess Maya Zaleska, who is Dracula's offspring. It's ironic that Gloria didn't want to be typecast like Lugosi was, and you do feel that here.
Be thou exorcised, O Dracula, and thy body long undead.
Her character reluctantly gives in to her vampire urges and is stuck between seeking a cure or trying to control herself. you do feel bad for her at times, especially when she goes after her victims. There's an infamous moment when Zaleska hires a female model to feast upon, while the poor girl believes it's for artistic purposes. Some have gone on to analyze this moment as carrying a subtle form of lesbianism. Granted, Zaleska does have some male victims, but you'd be surprised to know how this scene got past the censors. Apparently, the Production Code Administration allowed the scene to be intact, as long as it was followed up with the victim going to the hospital to establish that she was attacked by a vampire. In today's world, modern critics would still have a field day with this regardless. It's a shame this movie was not a box office hit when it came out, because there are some things that keep it engaging. You can almost feel Lugosi's presence throughout, and the dark cinematography lends to the atmosphere. My favorite character has to be her servant, Sandor, played by Irving Pitchell. He is the polar opposite to Renfield, who is more restrained, but his pessimistic attitude almost lends a bit of levity given the dark delivery of his lines.
Long shadows on the hillsides.
Evil shadows.
No, peaceful shadows. The flutter of wings in the treetops.
The wings of bats.
Dracula's Daughter is not perfect, but for a sequel, it's still worth your time. In comparison to Son of Dracula, this one was a frustrating sit. It shares no direct continuation of the first film. The Count leaves his England home to a Tennessee plantation, and while there are some good ideas, it falls so short of itself. Even the title's a bit of a misnomer, as the movie can't make up its mind as whether the central antagonist is another Dracula offspring or Dracula himself. The confusion is further foreshadowed right at the start of it.
We're here to meet a friend of the Caldwells, Count Alucard.
There was no count on this train. All old customers.
D-R-A-C.
What is Alucard spelled backwards? Oh my god, it makes so much sense! Alucard is goblin backwards! Joking aside, it's never quite clear if this is Dracula or not, but what I can say is that Lon Chaney Jr. is hard to imagine in this kind of role. Clearly they needed someone more suave and hypnotic, but I can see why Universal went with Chaney Jr. He was their top-tier monster actor at the time, given the bulk of work he was doing from the Wolfman to the Mummy sequels. He tries, but it's clear he feels miscast here.
Perhaps I should emphasize some of Catherine's wishes. When I came to Dark Oaks, I was not graciously welcomed.
And before you ask why they couldn't get Bela Lugosi, it's because Lugosi wanted to do more than just horror movies. However, a botched listing in 1937 casting book caused producers to think Lugosi was only interested in doing horror productions. Anyway, Son of Dracula is one of the lesser in the sequels. Despite some good visuals and a downbeat ending that I can get behind, this is one that doesn't carry the necessary need compared to some of the others that we have here. In fact, there's one other Dracula movie that I should mention because it is worth checking out. In 1931, there was a Spanish version that was commissioned by Universal when the Lugosi version was being filmed. Instead of the English movie being overdubbed, a second film crew was used to make their own Dracula, but for the foreign language market. Sets from the Lugosi movie were used, and even additional camera tech was applied specially for this film. So in some strange way, you could say this was the first studio horror remake, given it was filmed back-to-back with its original. However, the story of how this movie got made is the fantasy of scheming movie producers everywhere. Producer Paul Connor was deeply in love with Spanish actress Lupita Tovar, and he was afraid she moved back to Mexico. So he proposed to Laemmle to make Spanish-language versions of their movies for extra profit and to take advantage of the foreign film market. Laemmle was convinced, Lupita was hired on for the Mina role, and she was married to Connor for 50 years until his passing in 1998. Talk about the perfect crime. But at least they lived happily. Now, it's clear to see from a technical standpoint the Spanish version is superior, but is it better overall? Well, they do get away with a lot more with the Lucy character preying on children as in the novel, and you do get to see a little more cleavage skin compared to the other one. The acting, on the other hand, well, it feels fitting for this kind of production. Carlos Villarreal's take on Dracula is more exaggerated and less subtle, yet it's entertaining, and Pablo Rubio's performance on Renfield is just more unhinged than Dwight Fry. part of me does wish Lugosi was part of this production. You just can't picture Dracula without his presence and voice. It's too iconic to ignore. For a while, this version was considered lost, but thankfully a film print was discovered in the late 1970s, and it has been considered a major classic ever since then. Faring better with the sequels for 1931's Frankenstein. For its next feature, Bride of Frankenstein, director James Whale returned and was given more creative freedom, adding a unique blend of horror and dark comedy that goes together nicely here. Well, almost, given the Hays Code was established at this time and certain aspects of the script had to be cut back. Yet, they had no issues seeing the monster strung on a cross or having one character carry gay undertones.
Oh. I thought I was alone.
Colin Clive comes back as Henry Frankenstein, but Karloff as the monster is far more prominent here, which was a good direction to go in. This sequel adapts leftover material from Mary Shelley's book that was not covered, like the monster's unfortunate solo journey and his demand for a mate, which became key plot elements here. You do feel more sorry for the monster here, given what he has to go through. The villagers beat the snot out of him, everyone is terrified of his appearance, he makes friends with a blind hermit who teaches him how to speak.
And this is wine. To drink. Good. Good.
E.T., can you say that? Can you say E.T.?
E.T. But things fall apart when two hunters stumble upon them and misunderstood the moment. And to twist the knife even further, also spoiler alert, just when he gets his bride made, how does she react? Damn! It is the most heartbreaking thing you ever seen! This is a recurring theme that I like here about social acceptance. All the monster really wants is to be loved, but it's something that has to happen naturally. Maybe that's the biggest tragedy here. When we see him visit the blind hermit, we see that elements like love and compassion are possible here, but it can't be scientifically created or forced. Another standout is Ernest Thesiger as Dr. Pretorius, a mad scientist that wants to follow in Frankenstein's footsteps, but is way more demented.
Leave the charnel house and follow the lead of nature. Or of God, if you like your Bible stories.
He's so sickening to the point he can drink wine with skeletons and feels unfazed by the environment. My favorite moment is when he meets the monster for the first time. You can just immediately see him want to take advantage of the monster and Frankenstein's abilities in just one look. Speaking of which, Ella Lancaster plays Mary Shelley at the start of the movie in some form of prologue, but also the titular bride at the end. For a role so small, it has become quite iconic, with a strange hairdo and personality. I think my favorite parody of this is an episode of Tiny Toons where Plucky Duck has a nightmare about horror movies. That is just hilarious. Honestly, this movie has been praised so much to the point it feels like required viewing. If you enjoyed the first one, seek this out immediately. Opposite to that, Son of Frankenstein doesn't get much talk despite being a box office success and earning more positive reviews than the last film. My guess is that Son gets dismissed so easily given how it was tough to follow up after Bride's popularity. Yet, you'd be surprised to see just how solid of a sequel it is. Come to think of it, it's arguably better, if not equal to Bride of Frankenstein. It was the first film to kick off Universal's second horror cycle and set the groundwork for others in this era. Basil Rathbone plays Wolf Frankenstein, who moves back to his father's place in hope to restore the good family name. However, his presence is treated with much hostility until a mysterious hunchback named Igor appears to claim he worked with his father and is keeping his monstrous creation alive. If that wasn't enough, Wolf is placed under the watching eye of Inspector Crow, played by Lionel Atwill. And he knows Wolf is innocent, but can't help to think something sinister is taking place. Even if Karloff does return for the role of the monster, don't expect him to do much. Our three leads are the focus as Wolf is struck between turning over a leaf or exploring the work of his father. Atwill is entertaining as the inspector with the wooden arm, whose personal experience with the monster still haunts him.
One doesn't easily forget here, Baron. An arm torn out by the roots.
The big scene stealer here is Igor, played by Bela Lugosi, in what I have to admit is possibly his best and chilling role to date. The line delivery is so uncomfortable, and the twisted smile he gives is chilling enough to give you goosebumps.
Nobody can mend Igor's neck. It's all right. This is place of the dead.
You're all dead here.
As much as I love this sequel, there are some minor gripes I have. One is Donnie Dugan as Peter, Wolf's young son, whose acting is not quite good, but I test that to the time this movie was made. Child acting was not considered Oscar-worthy as it is today. And then again, it is weird to see Bambi act in a monster movie.
Oh, that's too bad.
Second is how there are some aspects of continuity that don't connect to Bride or the first one, and that just goes beyond how different the laboratory looks. Igor was not the first assistant but Fritz, and Crow's encounter with the monster is not depicted in either previous entry. It almost feels like there's a whole chapter of story that's missing here, though not many audiences considered continuity that big in the 1940s. It's funny to note this movie was considered to be shot in Technicolor, but the idea was abandoned after seeing how unsatisfactory the monster makeup looked in test footage. Probably for the best, given the black and white look still adds to the chilling and tense atmosphere. The twisted angles and surreal-looking sets really wouldn't look this good in Technicolor. If you haven't seen this one, give it a chance and it might be a good way to follow up an already lively series. In fact, even Ghost of Frankenstein is not half bad either. Granted, it's not the best of the batch, but if you want something entertaining, it delivers.
The lightning. It is good for you.
Igor is still alive, along with the Frankenstein monster, and they plan to visit the second son of Frankenstein, Ludwig, for help. You can already imagine what takes place. The monster goes on a small rampage, the townsfolk want to destroy him, Ludwig considers destroying him like Wolf. However, Wolf is convinced the only issue was the brain and decides to fix the monster instead. I won't give away where this leads, but it does add a nice surprise at the end. Karloff was set to play the monster, but scheduling conflicts with another movie prevented him from doing so. Instead, Lon Chaney Jr. was hired, with few changes made to Jack Pierce's makeup design. Chaney Jr. is not too bad in the role, performing the basic monster staples of grunting and acting beastly, yet he lacks the subtleties that Karloff had. Lugosi undoubtedly steals the whole show, and there's not too many problems I can pick from this entry.
That cardboard headstone tipped over. This graveyard is obviously phony.
Nobody will ever notice that. Filmmaking is not about the tiny details, it's about the big picture.
It doesn't have the dramatic weight the previous three Frankenstein movies had, yet some entertainment value to be had that honestly can't be ignored. Even if continuity was kind of an issue with the Frankenstein films, the sequels to the Mummy movie do try to provide some continuity between each film. Sort of. Instead of being a direct continuation of the 1932 Karloff classic, a new mummy was introduced in The Mummy's Hand named Karis, who was often used as a pawn by a high priest. This and the other mummy films that followed is where the idea of the killer mummy was introduced, with the creature staggering around after its victims and catching up to them despite the slow move. A trope that would carry over in future slasher films, most notable John Carpenter's Halloween. In regard to the Mummy sequels as a whole, they're entertaining on their own, even if some are kind of lackluster. Unlike the Frankenstein movies, the budgets for these films were more modest, placing them in a B-movie style status. Each entry got cheaper, even right down to reusing footage from the 1932 film, and music cues lifted from other Universal monster films. Even more baffling is the time jumps between each sequel. The Mummy's Tomb is set 30 years after the events of The Mummy's Hand, thus landing everyone in 1972. And while Mummy's Ghost takes a small time jump of, say, 3 or 4 years, The Mummy's Curse is the most head-scratching, as it takes a 25-year time gap, leading us to believe it's set in the 1990s.
Space is warped and time is bendable.
Okay, I know continuity was not a big element filmmakers considered, but that still perplexes me to see how no one did the math on this one. As for the Mummy himself, Karis was played first by Tom Tyler in The Mummy's Hand, while the final three were played by Lon Chaney Jr. Tom Tyler was selected for Mummy's Hand when Karloff was unavailable, as Universal executives felt Tyler had some of Karloff's likenesses. It didn't matter, given key shots in the reused flashback footage had to be refilmed in order to match Tom Tyler's resemblance, which are still easy to spot. Lon Chaney Jr. probably had it the worst given how uncomfortable he was under all those dirty wrappings, a one-eyed latex rubber mask that Chaney grew to have an allergy from, and being forced to limp around with a stiff leg and immobile arm. Chaney Jr. was so dissatisfied with the experience that it was said he hid a flask of vodka in the suit that he would take sips from in between and during takes. Admittingly, the idea of a drunk mummy is amusing at first, but it gets more sad when we realize that Chaney Jr. is doing all that he can under such uncomfortable circumstances. Like I said, there's elements of the sequels that differ from each one, but mostly they're the same and formulaic outside of some plot differences. I still say they're worth binging, even if the last two movies in this particular monster series are kind of lackluster. But you know the most beneficiary thing about these Mummy sequels? Almost each one nearly clocks in at around 60 minutes. So they make for a pretty easy binge. The next time you sit down and decide to watch an entire Netflix series, think about how you could be spending all that time watching the Mummy movies. And their sequels. Just keep friends, pizza, and booze on standby to make the experience all the more unique. I highly recommend that trifecta. On the other hand, the Invisible Man sequels have the benefit of not carrying any form of continuity. Each entry stands on their own, providing new and inventive ideas. The Invisible Man Returns centers on the brother of Griffin, who uses his formula to help an innocent man convicted of a murder he did not commit. While folks seem to forget it's the Griffin's brother that serves as the continuity factor, the more memorable aspect of this movie is Vincent Price as the one who gets to be turned invisible. This was one of his earliest roles that got Price into the horror genre. Unlike Claude Rains in the first film, you do sympathize with Vincent Price here, as he uses the ability to find the real killer. He nearly goes mad at one point, but he's able to hold his sanity together.
You know, being invisible has distinct advantages. It gives one a sense of power that's exciting.
Oh, I love it when I'm nasty.
Less notable was the Invisible Woman that decided to take things in the realm of screwball comedy. Virginia Bruce is the one who takes invisibility treatment and uses it to get back at her sexist and rude boss. It only gets more complicated when a group of thugs want to steal the device under the orders for their leader to get him back home or something like that. The idea of an invisible woman is not bad, but the problem is how they made it a comedy and the forced performances reflect that. It's nice to see them do something different, but there's only so many times I can endure another pratfall or verbal misunderstanding. They even get Shep Howard, the brother of Three Stooges Mo Howard, to play one of the goons. And man, he does all he can with the material he's given.
Where did you get this car?
Oh, I just picked it up.
Nice pickings.
And I know Shemp can be funny given his Stooge legacy, so I chalk this up to weak script and poor execution. Even strange is how they get Margaret Hamilton to play one of the housekeepers. At any given moment, I'm expecting her to turn herself invisible and use the ability to scare people under her Wicked Witch voice.
It's very nice to see you.
Neat idea, but could have been better. Then we got Invisible Agent, which aims for a more pulp fiction espionage thriller concept. The grandson of Griffin is captured by foreign Nazi agents who try to get the invisibility formula from him. Upon escape, he agrees to use his ability to help fight the Nazis and goes head-to-head with the Lieutenant General of the SS, played by Cedric Hardwicke, and a Japanese general played by Peter Lorre, who strangely looks like one of the bad guys from Raiders of the Lost Ark. Me wonder if it was an influence. I admit to enjoying the idea of how a simple invention can make such a big problem if fallen into the wrong hands. The only issue I have with this movie is execution. Invisible Agent was made at a time when Hollywood studios were producing movies for World War II, and it's not too hard to spot the underlying propaganda of, what if other enemies had control of such a power like invisibility? A scene in 1981's The Rocketeer where Cliff learns the dangers of the rocket pack via Howard Hughes certainly echoes an idea and fear that was quite commonplace back in 1942. Granted, the fear alone of how risky it is to harness such an ability like being invisible is felt, but there are moments when the social war attitudes are way too obvious and they get near preachy at times.
Do you think the world is ripe for such a discovery?
That is the common chatter of a man poisoned by the ideology of a decadent democracy.
And they say modern Hollywood is driven by politics these days. Still though, don't let that aspect get you down because, overall, it's still a fun flick, even if a little bit dated. The Invisible Man's Revenge is without doubt worth a watch. This time, a criminal named Robert Griffin, played by John Hall, acquires the ability from a scientist played by John Carradine, and he tries to get retaliation of a couple that double-crossed him. It's refreshing to see the titular Invisible Man return to his more murderous roots, and it leads to a variety of set pieces that keep this entry entertaining at best. There's a good mix of terror and comedy that feels well balanced here. Most notable is the scene in the pub where Griffin makes it look like his friend Herbert is an expert at darts. It's a fun flick that doesn't outstay its welcome. One thing I do admit about these Invisible Man movies is how the special effects improve with each entry. It feels like the boundaries are pushed more to showcase the invisible effect in many ways. In today's world, most of that would be CGI, but back then, the actors of certain elements would have to be shot against a black screen and matted into the movie. They were impressive when they first came out, and even by today, they're still a sight to behold. Going through the list of different monsteries here, it's kinda sad to see that the Wolfman never got his solo follow-up film. Though there was a movie called She-Wolf of London, but that one's more psychologically driven and less horror, so we're gonna skip over that one. Though keep in mind, I said solo follow-up, because the next 3 movies on our roster introduces a very well-known and unique idea for this first franchise crossover. In this case, the Monster Mash. First up at bat is Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. Even if the name Frankenstein is in the title, this movie is really more about the Wolfman. Lon Chaney Jr. returns as Larry Talbot, who literally comes back from the dead and tries to find a way to remain permanently dead. All it takes is one silver bullet. How damn hard is that? Oh well. He goes to the Frankenstein castle to find the monster, and the two do more digging to find the doctor's secrets. Right off the bat, there are some issues with this entry, especially when you try to factor in how this continues from Ghost of Frankenstein. The movie takes place in Thessalia, where Ghost was set, yet the monster is discovered in ice despite his hot demise in the last film he was in. Yet the final straw that breaks so much is that the monster was supposed to speak and provide some form of continuity, but all the dialogue got cut. And this might give away that special surprise I was teasing about Ghost of Frankenstein, so please take this with a grain of salt. The monster here is played by Bela Lugosi, as the idea of Lon Chaney Jr. playing both Wolfman and Frankenstein monster would have been hard to pull off. So Lugosi donned the role, read the lines, and then a preview screening where audience members laughed at the Hungarian accent delivery caused him to get cut. As nice as it would have been to see those lost moments, this would have added more confusion given the surviving script pages showed the monster had some kind of split personality. What was more important is that the lost dialogue explained that the monster was blind because of the brain transfer that happened at the end of the last movie. So with all that gone, most of the time the monster's just stumbling around with his arms out. But that's just because he was supposed to be blind, and none of that is mentioned in this entry because it got all cut out. You know, it's funny when you think about it this way. When people imitate Dracula, they usually think of the Lugosi version. But when people imitate the Frankenstein monster... If you ask me, I'm starting to think that Lugosi was the true face of the Universal Studios monsters. The movie as a whole is pretty clunky, but it's still entertaining regardless. The first half, which focuses on Larry Talbot, is well done, but once the Frankenstein monster comes into play, it starts to get uneven. What makes up for it is the entertainment factor, despite its shortcomings. By 1943, this is when horror movies were viewed as just popcorn entertainment and less as A-list pictures. The two scenes that stand to me the most is the village song and the big fight at the end between the Wolfman and the monster. They clearly cement the campy, yet enjoyable comic book nature that eases any sense of logic. Although, say you want a good Monster Mash movie. Well, House of Frankenstein is no better, but it's a vast improvement. The focus is on a scientist named Dr. Niemann, played by Boris Karloff, who seeks out the studies of Frankenstein's work with his hunchback assistant Daniel. Along the way, he makes promises with Dracula, the Frankenstein monster, the Wolfman, and even from his own lackey that get broken one bit at a time. The less said, the better, because this one is worth checking out. Seeing Boris Karloff play a role that doesn't involve makeup really shows what commanding presence he has. He's a lot of fun to watch, and it's the type of character you love to hate.
The garrulous gentleman who testified that he saw me take a body from its grave. We don't forget Herr Strauss, do we?
His assistant Daniel, played by J. Carroll Naish, is probably the most tragic of the batch. Much like with Quasimodo, he just wants to be loved, but gets dejected due to his deformity. You really grew to feel sorry for him. Even though this movie does bring Dracula, the Frankenstein monster, and the Wolfman in one film, they don't quite come together. Dracula is played by John Carradine here, and he's okay. He has the charm down, but lacks a sinister edge. It's a shame he's only there for the first quarter of the film, as the rest focuses on the monster and Larry Talbot. In a strange way, this feels like a celebration of the Universal monster classics. You have plot elements from Hunchback of Notre Dame, the Wolfman, and so forth woven in. It pays homage while also doing something different with these tropes. It's funny because I remember seeing this first time as a kid and really disliking it. I never like how they mistreated the monsters, and the ending feels a bit too abrupt. On repeated viewings, House of Frankenstein has gotten better, and it stands as a good crowd pleaser. House of Dracula, however, can be described under two words: cash grab. Yet, it didn't start out that way. Originally it was going to be called Wolfman vs. Dracula, but the cuts made to appease the censors caused it to be shelved. It was later reworked after House of Frankenstein's success came in, but under the name Destiny. Suppose the Universal Studio heads disliked the name and had changed to House of Dracula. The plot involves a scientist named Dr. Edelman, who is asked by Dracula to cure him. Yes, apparently the Count is bored of his blood-sucking days and wants to be human. Yet not long after, Larry Talbot shows up asking to be cured of his werewolfism. Given what happened to them in the last movie, it's never explained how they are still alive. Just before you think this is a standalone entry, the flippin' Frankenstein monster shows up along with some continuity from House of Frankenstein. And in the middle of all that, Edelman gets infected with Dracula's blood during a transfusion, turning him into some kind of Jekyll and Hyde monster that is not explained well. And that is the best way to describe the experience of this one. There are ideas here, but things are not connected well. What's worse is Edelman deals with Dracula and Wolfie here believing their problems are some form of mental illness, which really hurts the building mythos we have seen for the past films. And before you ask, well, these movies follow no continuity, so what's the point? That's exactly my problem. House of Dracula is stuck between trying to be its own entry while preserving continuity, and it can't be both. The manner of explaining these monsters' abilities with medical science is sheer laughable, and it doesn't make any sense. Yeah, the Frankenstein monster you could because, well, it's made from science, but Dracula and Wolfman are pure, supernatural elements that should not need scientific explanation. One turns into a wolf, the other is a vampire blood-sucking bat. Plain and simple. It doesn't need science to explain them! Also, gotta love how Glenn Strange, who plays the Frankenstein monster here, doesn't get to do much until the final 3 minutes of the movie. At least in House of Frankenstein, Glenn got to do more. Here, it's just that they can have a big explosive ending, but most of it recycled footage from Ghost of Frankenstein. The only two positives I can think of is the eerie cinematography, and the scenes of Edelman as a monster are kind of fun. And given this was the final movie Jack Pierce did his makeup job, it's a shame to see his craft go to waste for so little monster action. Especially with an embarrassing entry like this one. House of Dracula was a critical bomb, and it didn't do financially well either. To say this was the last serious entry in Universal's second horror cycle is a pure joke to me. It's considered the weakest entry in the batch, and man, does it show. 1945 was not only the end of Universal's interest in horror, but also World War II. At this time, audiences were less interested in monsters and not even afraid of them, given the horrors what they had to face overseas. Instead, the attention was turned more to light fantasies and musicals to fill in the void. And then they decided to have the monsters meet Abbott and Costello. Bud Abbott and Lou Costello were a popular comedy duo that started in nightclubs, earned a radio show, and proved to be very bankable for the big screen.
Who's on second?
Who's on first?
I don't know.
He's on third.
There I go. Back.
Oh, no.
Every time you hear those two guys, who's on first? What's on second? I don't know. The little fat guy, he killed...
Their sketches and routines were full of witty wordplay and carried some solid slapstick.
Well, when you get your order, you go to the checker and you show him your slip.
How what?
Show the checker your slip.
Can't.
Why not?
Shame to tell you.
Why?
I'm not wearing any.
Not to mention, they were the most powerful stars at Universal. Meanwhile, a British entrepreneur named J. Arthur Rank purchased some interest in the studio and cemented Universal's merger in 1946, hence renamed Universal International. Yeah, they nearly went bankrupt the following year, and the popularity of Abbott and Costello was starting to dwindle. Producer Robert Arthur got together with some writers that worked on Abbott and Costello's films to bring a movie that combined some of Universal's monsters with the Funny Men. Despite Arthur being passionate about the project, the duo were not fans of the idea, with Costello even admitting his quote-unquote 5-year-old daughter could write something better. Well, they needed a big hit to keep their bankability, and reluctantly decided to meet Frankenstein. The plot centers on Abbott and Costello's baggage clerks named Chick and Wilbur that are ordered to recover some lost luggage in the form of the Frankenstein monster and Dracula for a wax museum. As it turns out, these monsters are the real deal, and Dracula wants to use Wilbur's brain to fix the monster. Meanwhile, Larry Talbot is in the mix as he tries to help the guys despite his ongoing fight to control the werewolfism. This movie is often a major fan favorite, so it might come as a shock to those that I say how overrated I feel this one is. There is enjoyment to be had here, yet here's my biggest problem. A good bulk of the movie weighs heavily on Wilbur being aware of the monsters, while Chick doesn't believe him. It's an ongoing gag that is done multiple times, and it kinda wears its welcome. I get it, a lot of comedy stems from ignorance, mistake, and repetition, yet there's only so many times I can watch Wilbur be left in hysterics while Chick shrugs him off. It's amusing at first, but it gets old really fast. In terms of positives, I do like how the monsters are played serious. Bela Lugosi returns as Dracula for the first time, Lon Chaney Jr. dons his werewolf routine, and Glenn Strange gets to do more as the Frankenstein monster, even if it's not much. The standout is easily Lugosi, who fits right back into his trademark vampire role. There's even some funny lines he gets that undermine the potential that he had.
I approve very highly of your choice. What we need today is young blood and brains.
Still, not everyone was happy. After the film's release, Chaney claimed Abbott and Costello ruined horror movies by making buffoons out of the monsters.
Listen, I might tear you limb from limb.
Still, it's no denying how successful Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein turned out to be. It was such a box office hit that Universal International decided to pair the two with other horror icons. There was The Killer, Boris Karloff, which had the duo dealing with a murderous Swami, but that entry was more murder mystery given it was originally intended to be a Bob Hope vehicle. The next monster meetup with the Invisible Man is, in my opinion, one of the better movies that I would recommend checking out.
All right, boys, let's go.
An innocent boxer named Tommy, played by Arthur Franz, is accused of murdering his agent. Yes, Bud and Lou have to clear his name while the guy turns invisible. This movie allows the two to perfect their sketch comedy and really churn out some funny stuff.
What's happened here? I don't know. He was trying to put me to sleep with this watch like this here. He kept saying, sleep, 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 tick-tock, tick-tock.
The biggest highlight is when Lou poses as a champion boxer with help from the invisible Tommy. The manner of special effects and the way they stage invisibility during these scenes elevate the humor, knowing how meek Lou is. And like I said before, every entry in the Invisible Man franchise improves upon its special effects.
I used to be a juggler.
The one where they meet Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde was okay. It can be best described as having a rocky opening, solid middle, but a crap ending. Boris Karloff plays the titular doctor, but his demented ego is performed by stuntman Eddie Parker. His scenes are a pure highlight that make the movie worth seeing for him alone. Yet, most of the time I keep wondering what this one would be like without the inclusion of Abbott and Costello, yet the midsection of the movie proved me otherwise.
Sarsaparilla. Have some cheese.
Yes, sir.
Is there anything wrong?
Why, no, sir.
Them mice get bigger every day.
Rodents of unusual size? I don't think they exist.
Yet, it does feel a little cringy to hear these two get the name Slim and Tubby.
Tubby, this is no time to hang out laundry.
The best scene for me is when Costello's character follows Hyde into a wax museum and comes across wax likenesses of Dracula and the Frankenstein monster. The last one where they met the mummy was not half bad either, but at this point, you can definitely tell the series was running out of gas. Heck, it says a lot when you see the actual duo don't meet the mummy until about an hour in. Still, there are some good highlights, like a funny running gag with a tape recorder.
I'm gonna find out.
Yes, a light gun, and I'm gonna use it. There's a light gun, and I'm gonna use it. Put your hands up.
And Costello consuming a cursed medallion on accident. There's laughs to be had, but the movie's title falls short of itself. In fact, this is the last one Abbott and Costello made with Universal. Despite good reviews, Meet the Mummy was a box office disappointment given the minimal advertising Universal did on it. Abbott and Costello made one more film together at United Artists, and they decided to split up. In regards to their monster meetups, they're decent crowd pleasers at best. In fact, I can't think of one that I saw where it was just downright awful. Each one is unique and provide plenty of entertainment if you're looking for a good laugh. Now, there is one more monster I didn't talk about, and that's because I wanted to save them especially for last. Sure, Universal Studios had their run with Dracula, the Frankenstein monster, and the Wolfman, but there was one more series of creature flicks they created during the 1950s Atomic B-movie age that proved to be quite popular. And in order to experience that, we're going to need our special 3D glasses for the ride. Two things motivated the creation of the iconic Gillman: the success of 3D movies like House of Wax, and producer William Alland hearing a myth about a race of fish and human creatures in the Amazon. Enter Creature from the Black Lagoon, the story of a bunch of scientists that explore the Amazon after finding fossilized remains of a new species. What they discover instead is a living being that some want to study or bring back home for proof. Jack Arnold was a perfect choice for this film, and he really knows how to keep the audience engaged with likable characters and a well-developed creature. Don't believe me? Check out It Came from Outer Space. It has the luxury of being filmed in 3D while also having the same reasons why Creature from the Black Lagoon is so remembered and great. Speaking of which, the most unique aspect of the Gillman is the concept of a universal monster that can be menacing on land as well as frightening in the water. Even for 1954, this is still impressive given the difficulty superformer Rico Browning had to endure for the underwater scenes. He had to hold his breath for 4 whole minutes. When the Gillman is on land, he's depicted by Ben Chapman. While Jack Pierce's protege Bud Westmore is often cited for the Gillman's conception, true credit goes to Disney animator Millicent Patrick, who is known for animating the devilish Chernabog for Fantasia, as well as work on Dumbo and the Reluctant Dragon. She worked with Bud Westmore in the 1950s and became the first woman to work in a special effects makeup department. In a time of movies when most of the monsters seen were giants from the result of atomic explosions or experiments gone wrong, the Gillman stands out for being a prehistoric being that has stuck around for ages. When the scientists come in to look for him, you do feel sorry for the Gillman given they are invading his home. Perhaps the biggest win that made this a box office hit was the use of its 3D. As much as I enjoy seeing foam rocks or swords getting pointed at the screen, there are times when certain shots look good in both formats, given how they are photographed. The underwater scenes are still impressive, and were groundbreaking for a time when filming an action scene in pure water was a major risk. The success of this one led to 2 sequels, Revenge of the Creature and The Creature Walks Among Us. Director Jack Arnold only returned to do Revenge as it brought Gillman to civilization via the Ocean Harbor Oceanarium in Florida. Also, hi Clint Eastwood, you're also in Tarantula.
Seeing as how I've got a .44 Magnum in my pocket, the most powerful handgun in the world.
How'd he get in here?
This guy's bad. This is his first and last movie.
Yeah.
The premise alone is enough to give Gillman new ground to explore, and it makes you want to see him cause all sorts of havoc. It does have a slow burn, but kicks into gear when the monster goes on the loose. I only recommend seeing this one in its Mystery Science Year 3000 format. The onslaught of riffing just adds to the enjoyment.
Out of my way, air sucker.
Less successful was The Creature Walks Among Us. In this one, Gillman is burned by accident on capture and goes through surgery to become more human-like to survive. Doctors notice he's starting to evolve by shedding his gills and even using his own lung system. This one, I don't recommend. I can see they tried to take things in a new direction with the Gillman being more human, but it's trapped under a dramatic love triangle that's only suitable for General Hospital. There's a scientist that is abusive to his wife, It was not too happy when he sees her comfortable with one of the local guides, and it makes things more awkward when the Gillman gets into the center of it all. Between this and seeing the Gillman mutate into Curly Howard is just cringy to watch. The movie ends with Gillman killing the cruel husband and contemplating about returning to the ocean despite his new form.
What a rotten ending!
Overall, the Gillman series was a nice way to cap off Universal's line of horror icons. Even as the classics were placed to rest, it was nice to see they tried one more time, and concluded with a classic monster that was thrilling, inventive, and sympathetic. This was the last in Universal's line of monsters. There! Now with that monster out of the way, we can move forward to... What the... Uh-oh.
Oh, hey, Boxing Jooster. Get this. I'm doing a lot of practice on my little paddleball game, and I didn't know if you want me to give you a sample of the kinds of tricks I've been doing.
I'd ixnay on the paddleball, eh? I mean, we're being projected in 3D right now, so I don't want anyone to get hurt.
3D. Oh, hey! I guess it means your little friends can participate in the goods, too. I call this one shooting for the moon. Woo! I call this one opening Saturn. Can I think a minute angry? Get away from me! Get away! It's got loose! The evil's loose! Ooh, my nose! It's coming again! Hey, what are you doing? I've been through a whole lot nicer than eat as you torn with me.
Hey, Chowderhead. Huh? How's this for an eye-popping effect?
Oh my goodness, the pain! Oh, the pain!
I warned you. That's what you get for messing with the third dimension and my viewers.
The pain! Oh, the pain! The pain's too much. I just, oogala boogala! Oh! Oh yeah, no way I'm getting scared this Halloween. I'll get the tops and you get the shrieks.
You might have won that one. But my super scope says otherwise! Oh, don't worry about a thing, Bobcat. I wouldn't obliviate you with this little beauty. After all, it's only set to stun! You think I forget what you did to me in that Sweeney Todd video? Oh no! Ready? Aim!
You're nuts, Jack! Stun!
Rats. It cut away. I'll, get this fixed up. You take another intermission in the meantime. There's some Windex around here. I could... Oh. Hey, before we take a break, can someone give me a refill? I would kind of appreciate it. Poopy.
What? No dip?
For a really great Halloween, pick up tons of Pepsi and Doritos.
Hear about Willis and Kaspersky?
No.
Yeah, they got caught giving Willis's mother a ride to bingo in the back of the
You
squad.
told me that yesterday.
Oh, yeah.
Oh. Did you do that?
No.
real funny.
He's mischievous. And he's in a city full of tough bosses, mind-bending puzzles, and mutant vegetables. Jersey Devil.
Oh, get off of me!
It's the Pizza Head Show.
Hey, everybody! I'm on my way to Pizza Hut to get a Goosebumps Kids Pack. Yay!
Almost there.
Hey, this isn't the right way.
Well, Scarecrow Steve says it is.
He's no scarecrow.
Sure he is.
Uh-oh, I think I woke the neighbors.
Look, Pizza Head, you'll be perfectly safe in there.
Okay.
Relax, the Goosebumps guys just want you for dinner. See you in the next lifetime. Now you can collect one of 3 ghoulish Goosebumps Glow and Tell story card sets when you buy a Pizza Hut Kids Pack.
There. Well, at least the screen's fixed, which is the good thing. But it appeared to be still in black and white. Oh well. Make do with what you got, and roll with the changes. Yes, Universal Studios' Monsters came to an end in 1956, but that was not the end of our tale. True, while we looked at the franchise as a whole, it's the legacy afterwards that made things all the more interesting. For a while, Universal Monsters remained dormant, but the way they changed the horror landscape was felt. Within a good bulk of time, their presence influenced and lasted in many ways without the necessity of new movies. Case in point, the Hammer horror films. With Mary Shelley and Bram Stoker's work in the public domain, it made the famous British studio easy to adapt their own monster flicks. Of course, there was the challenge of writing out stories that didn't copy the Universal films, but they brought in a new wave of horror never experienced. Outside of being filmed in color, these movies challenged just how far they could push the boundaries of sex, violence, and blood, causing some headaches for the British censors once in a while. In these films, they explored more areas that I don't even think the Universal films touched. Dr. Frankenstein could be a pure anti-hero, Dracula's a straight-up beast, and the Mummy is... The Mummy. These movies were successful in their own right, making actors like Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing household names. Their reaches of horror expanded further into psychological thrillers, and most notably their prehistoric phase with 1 million years BC. They made such a name for themselves in America that even Universal chimed in to distribute some of their movies and even fund them. Most notable is when they collaborated on Evil of Frankenstein, which gave Hammer the will to duplicate certain aspects of the Jack Pierce's monster makeup and the look of the laboratory. These movies did their job well, but perhaps too well. By the late 1960s, movies like Bonnie and Clyde and Rosemary's Baby started to test the waters of how far their audience could handle explicit violence, which pushed further than what Hammer did. In the mid-1970s, the company ceased production with reasons being how the horror market got oversaturated, and the lack of American studio funding, which led to their end. 1964 gave us the Munsters, a soft extension to the Universal Studio monsters by placing the classic creatures in the form of a dysfunctional family. The Frankenstein monster as the goofball dad, Dracula as the mad scientist uncle, Dracula's daughter as the tough but kind mother, Wolfman as a good son, and the beauty as the aunt. And if you want a bigger connection between this and Universal Studio monsters, guess who did the makeup? That's right, Jack Pierce's protege, Bud Westmore. Talk about the next generation. With the collective Universal monster films playing well on television and the popularity of shows like Bewitched and I Dream of Jeannie, it seemed like a good idea to take the traditional tropes and fuse them into something different, yet fun. It was campy, sitcom-y, full of slapstick, yet it carried a good heart. And yes, I'm aware it went head-to-head with The Addams Family. I love both shows. I really do. But even nothing could compare to the surprise success of 1966's Batman. Yeah, the Munsters never quite caught on despite earning decent ratings for Season 1, but got trouble maintaining its audience during Season 2. With the Cape Crusader offering color and non-stop action thrills, it was Adam West's Dark Knight that slayed the sitcom. However, it gained new life in syndication while going as far to get some hit-and-miss revivals on the way. Whether you love or dislike them, the Munsters still proved audiences were welcome to new forms of the classic monsters.
We're not just the plain old Munsters anymore, you know. We're the average American family. And I think we owe it to our country to keep our sense of humor.
Now, while our next flick was not connected to the Universal brand, it's still one that is worth mentioning, as it provided a way to somehow honor and help us remember the monsters. Enter Rankin Bass's Mad Monster Party, a full-length stop-motion feature that attempted to do the impossible. Get all the monsters together, and it did just that. In the past, Universal had a tough time trying to get all the monsters together and create a feasible plot that is able to give the monsters some well-needed screen time together. This one comes so close, but it still works. Baron Frankenstein calls upon his fellow creatures of the night to announce an heir to his empire. It brought together the Frankenstein monster, Dracula, Jekyll and Hyde, the Mummy, the Wolfman, Invisible Man, Gillman, and Peter Lorre.
For the first time, she noticed me. She told me to creep.
The movie was also notable for using the talents of Mad Magazine's Harvey Kurtzman, who co-wrote the screenplay, and cartoonist Jack Davis, who designed the monsters. With that in mind, Mad Monster Party brings a satirical nature that celebrates and mocks the monster movie cliches. Also to boot was having Boris Karloff as Baron Frankenstein, who was hired on just for star power, along with Phyllis Diller as the monster's bride. Their inclusion really elevates the tongue-in-cheek tone, with Karloff playing it pure straight.
Quoth the raven, nevermore. Ah, I've done it. Created the means to destroy matter.
While Diller is a pure riot, mocking and jabbing along the way.
How do I look? What do you know about chic, you poor invention of a man, you?
Unfortunately, Mad Monster Party was not a box office success, but it kinda got screwed over by its producer Joseph E. Levine, head of Embassy Pictures. He was disappointed with the reception of Rankin Bass's first two films, and quietly dropped Mad Monster Party into Saturday Kitty matinee screenings. Few critics had the chance to see this movie, and this party nearly fell into obscurity. Hell, the New York Times review didn't get published until 2 years after the film was released. But don't let that get you down. It has gained a cult following over the years, and even seen as a Halloween staple to some. I highly recommend getting the new Blu-ray from Umbrella Entertainment. Not only is it packed with unique retrospectives, but the restoration work is a pure labor of love here.
Yeah.
While the 1970s brought upon new horrors, there was some breathing room for the monsters. Case in point, Mel Brooks's Young Frankenstein. Much like with Mad Monster Party, it reminded us why we love the classic monster films and celebrated the tropes we continue to enjoy from them. Clearly, the more successful vehicle, its obvious target to parody was the Frankenstein films.
That's Frankenstein.
Whatever.
The element that made it so memorable was the manner of satire. Instead of asking, wouldn't this be funny, it really asks, what if it did happen in the Frankenstein films?
Frankenstein.
Shut up.
For example, we all know the scene where the monster meets the blind man, but what if the encounter didn't go so well? Or what if the love interest was really hard to please?
I'm yours, all of me. What else can I say?
My sweet love.
The hair, just been said.
Sorry.
And maybe the Hunchback assistant was more incompetent than we thought.
But I'm not going to be the first. Dim your eyes! Too late.
Even if you didn't see the original the original Mad Doctor classics, the fun of it was how Mel Brooks and crew went above and beyond to make it look and feel authentic to the classic film series. Even right down to the cinematography. There are moments when I forget I'm watching a comedy and feel like I'm seeing a lost Universal monster movie. The equipment in the laboratory scenes were actual props saved from the Frankenstein films by special effects creator Ken Strickfaden. Brooks discovered he kept the original props in his garage and not only rented the equipment from him, but also gave Ken the deserved film credit he never got in the previous movies. If that's not a bigger connection to this and Universal's monster films, I don't know what else is. The less said, the better, because the legacy this classic left behind reminded us why we truly love Frankenstein.
My name is Frankenstein!
Quit clowning me around and make up your mind! Is it Frankenstein or Frankenstein? Please tell me!
Now, if you wanted something more serious, 1979 gave us Jod Badham's take on the legendary vampire Dracula. What makes this interesting is how much like the 1939 Lugosi movie, this one uses the Bram Stoker novel and the 1924 stage play for its source of adaptation. Given how much time has passed in filmmaking techniques and audiences' tolerance of bloody horror, it seemed like a good idea to bring back a classic monster. In the role of the Count was Frank Langella, who really brings his all to the part. He makes this take his own by acting Dracula as suave and beastly as he can take it. But the most unique aspect was bringing an erotic tone that was never attempted before. It's an interesting performance, and he makes it worth seeing this movie alone for. That is, if you can get past the weird afro they decided to give him for some reason. In between that, you had some solid scares, Donald Pleasance, and probably the weakest take on Van Helsing. Overall, it's a good movie, so why is it not fondly remembered? It did moderately well at the box office, but not the major success Universal was hoping for. On top of that, this Dracula was released the same summer as Ridley Scott's Alien, ushering in a new wave of monster never seen in science fiction. Truly, the Count was apparently no match for a mean, scaly mother from outer space.
And for a while, that was it. The 1980s ushered in a new wave of horror monster icons, the likes which included Jason Voorhees, Freddy Krueger, Pinhead, Chucky, you name it.
And then you had films like Transylvania's 65000, sort of a 1980s take on the Abbott and Costello movies.
This is Transylvania. Don't you want to ask us about Dracula?
Put your face to my breast. Tell me you want me to.
Do you want to wait for lightning, Master? I don't work with lightning. I hate it. I work with all this other shit.
Two tabloid reporters, played by Jeff Goldblum and Ed Beagley Jr., are sent to Transylvania to get a story on the Frankenstein monster.
Because I'm counting on you guys for a Frankenstein story.
I'm sorry, you're counting on us for a what story?
When they arrive there, the townsfolk laugh off at the purpose of them being there.
I've got Godzilla in the back room.
I like it. That's a good one.
How about the blob?
But lo and behold, some monsters do go on the rampage. But only after an hour of comedy has passed by, mostly hit and miss jokes.
Did you see Dracula? Yeah, when it first came out.
I hesitated on bringing this one up because there's not too many connections outside of the monsters near the end. But a big twist about them will either ruin the experience or make things funnier in hindsight. All I can say is, for an ensemble comedy, it's not half bad, but more crap than a graveyard smash.
Crap? I like crap. I love crap. I need crap. Crap is what sells newspapers. Look around you. Crap, crap, crap. Crap, 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 crap.
Once in a while you had something with the classic monsters, but Universal wasn't even involved. You had something like 1985's The Bride, but things like that kind of just came and went. Unless you count one major classic from 1987 that would bring all the traditional monsters back together one last time. Enter Fred Deckard's The Monster Squad, which was a pure love letter to the classics, while wondering what it would be like if the Universal monsters went up against Little Rascals. It was a genius idea, reinventing the classic looks and giving these creatures a fresh update. Dracula was a pure badass, the Gillman was fiercer than ever, Wolfman was... Wolfman, the Mummy was creepier, the Dracula brides were sensual yet dangerous, and the Frankenstein monster was certainly the biggest teddy bear of the group. Now, funny enough, this movie almost would have been part of Universal's catalog, but unfortunately one studio executive passed on the idea, even if they would later handle some international distribution. The Monster Squad definitely feel like the monster mash we all wanted, as a group of kids go toe-to-toe with the frightening entourage of creatures.
Wolfman's got nard.
At times, it could be a heartwarming and fun family film,
Scary.
yet other times, not so much.
Give me the amulet, you bitch!
Movies like Gremlins and Goonies really knew how to walk that fine line between being for kids and adults. This one really pushes boundaries to the point it earns the PG-13 rating. It does it so much that it became a hard film to market. It also doesn't help it was released around the same time Joel Schumacher's Lost Boys made its debut, which older audiences seem to be more interested in seeing. Thankfully, the cult following on this one has been growing over the years, and it keeps getting better with each home video re-release. It was a nice way to give the classic monsters their final bow, even if it took a while for audiences to discover. In between all of this, the monsters were still kept alive through another venue, home video. Since the 1950s, a lot of Universal Monsters flicks got heavy airplay on television, albeit hosted by famous horror hosts like Elvira or Svengoolie, if all else placed into syndication. But their biggest break came in the form of the home video market. So much merchandise was sold, from model kits to costumes and t-shirts, that eventually it was time for these beings to make their way into your personal video library. While big titles like Frankenstein and Dracula did get released in the 1980s, the major release wouldn't be until 1991 when Universal decided to revive and remarket the entire catalog of their Universal monster films. It gave filmgoers a chance to see the classics, and others they probably had never heard of. This was a genius move given how well the home video market was doing in the 1990s. And it was this exposure that brought the monsters back to the public limelight. Now you could own and see these movies, but most important was how some of them were presented. Titles like Frankenstein could be seen in its original form, not viewed since 1931, with lost footage thought to be censored forever restored back into the film.
In the name of God, now I know it!
Okay, so that line would remain uncensored until 2004, but nobody's perfect.
Even Universal started to incorporate the monsters into their theme parks with Halloween Horror Nights, a popular event that happens every Halloween season. And by 1997, these creatures were so well known to the point they got licensed as stamps.
Wow, what a unique novelty. You could be typing up a letter to your pen pal and then stuff it in the envelope, and suddenly you stamp it with either Dracula or Phantom of the Opera at the top. It's clear that audiences' undying love and interest in the monsters was still ongoing. So, would it be fair to say that this was a good time to bring some, or if not at least all of them, back to the big screen?
She's got plans for you.
Say, Grumble, old buddy, would it be okay if I just ended things right here before we go down this marvelous train wreck of a era for the monsters?
Looking for a yes? Wrong!
It appears my lot in life is set. Okay, granted, not everything was awful, it's just where things led to on this tram tour was not the good. But with all due respect, it didn't start off that way. For the most part. 1999 gave us The Mummy. While it wasn't fully horror, there were some strings of it in there. Just more action-adventure. Taking its cues more from the Mummy sequels of the 1940s, a group of explorers awaken the High Priest Imhotep that goes on a rampage while seeking to reunite with his long-dead lover. It ushered in a new kind of monster that was faster and deadlier thanks to the evolving special effects, but some practical stuff was used too. It was unleashed to a summer audience, and its massive box office gross was a pure surprise to those who thought it wouldn't do so well. And, I admit, it's a perfect crowd pleaser. The major problem I have is that most of the horror elements were underlining and less prominent. But I get it. This was something that was meant for a new generation. It was all action-adventure, but it kind of gets a little annoying when you dig deep and see what it could have been before, with the project handed over temporarily to directors like Joe Dante, George A. Romero, and even Clive Barker, who wanted to go into the more horror aspect, until Stephen Sommers jumped on and decided to make it all Indiana Jones-like, with 10% horror added to it. It's there, but it's not fully there. And again, Universal was in a bit of a financial pickle and they needed a big hit. And this was it. And I can confirm this given how I was young and wanted to see Star Wars Episode 1, which was also released around the same time. Never did I get the chance to see Episode 1. I would be playing softball and hearing the teammates spoil stuff like how Darth Maul got split in half. Yet, when school started, everyone was talking about the Mummy instead. Hell, I remember the cafeteria displaying a giant inflatable coffin in connection to the film. It was that well enjoyed. The reign of Universal's newfound revival caused them to create 2 follow-ups and a spin-off series based on the Scorpion King. While it didn't come close to as good as the first one, The Mummy Returns was consistently enjoyable. Arnold Vosloo got to show his chops more, the action set pieces truly raised the stakes, and honestly, it was kind of fun. There's some problems with the plot that feel a little too convoluted, but I'm willing to look past that. Unlike movie number 3, which arrived 7 years too late. This clip alone sums up the everything I have issues with Tomb of the Dragon Emperor.
Fire! What? Again? Your ass is on fire! My ass! Look there! My ass is on fire! Put it out! Put me out, Rick! Spank my ass! Spank my ass!
Not even the CGI Yetis could save this one. Meanwhile, Universal decided to tap into the direct-to-video market for family audiences, given how never-ending the Land Before Time sequels were. After success with reissuing the Chipmunk Adventure in home video, they decided to have Alvin and the gang meet the monsters. What we got out of that were 2 features where they met Frankenstein and the Wolfman. The first one had Dr. Frankenstein trying to revive his monster at a theme park the Chipmunks worked at. It was fun. For the most part. Okay, it was no Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island, yet the concept alone led to some neat ideas, like the Frankenstein monsters befriending the boys, and I kinda like the over-exaggerated design of Dr. Frankenstein.
Tell me, are you an organ donor?
In a snarky sense, I want to believe this was Dr. Scratch and Sniff before and after the drug intake. The resemblance is quite uncanny. The problem I have with this entry is how it holds itself to a basic formula, like, let's have a moral in here that's very crucial to tell for the kids, and put in songs to pad out the running time. Yeah, you do that. Over here, I'm gonna play the drums while listening to Sky Cycle.
And it's terror time again. They've got you running through the night.
It's interesting because their second movie, where they met the Wolfman, I feel is better. A strange neighbor moves in named Lawrence Talbot, Alvin gets suspicious, and thinks he's a monster. Meanwhile, Theodore gets bitten by a strange dog and starts to undergo an interesting transformation. It was darker for sure, but it took more risks compared to the previous entry. And by having the element of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde utilized into the story, it felt like a unique complement of the whole beastly side motif. It parodied the original Wolfman film while also homaging it. Even right down to having the fortune teller character be a modern psychic and monster movie hostess, which I admit was a clever idea. Small updates to classic tropes like that really show the creativity placed in here.
This may be the most important book you ever buy, because I'm telling you, monsters are everywhere.
Now, you could argue it's really a family-friendly version of Fright Night, but with werewolves, and yeah, the comparisons are too easy to ignore. But it was nice to see some creativity here, even if it was made for a younger audience in mind. Still, it kinda makes me wonder why they didn't continue this trend. I always wondered what it would have been like if they met with Dracula or Gillman. Either way, these 2 are worth checking out if you want a lighter alternative. Unless you're someone that can't tolerate the high-pitched voices, or as Roger Ebert nicely put it,
and their irritating little squeaky high-pitched chipmunk voices until you're just about ready to go crazy.
I'm telling you, that guy creeps me out.
Speaking of monster mashes, 2004 saw the release of Van Helsing, which was another attempt to bring the monsters together, and possibly launch a franchise. It combined the big 3 monsters under one roof, had Hugh Jackman as the monster hunter himself, and in the directing chair was Stephen Sommers,
who helped Universal before with the first two Mummy movies, considering he too wanted to do his own Monster Mash. It had Van Helsing going against Dracula, the Frankenstein monster, and even the Wolfman. The monsters look cool, the action scenes are pure spectacle, so how come it didn't catch on? Well, I can think of a few reasons. The biggest that many talk about is the overabundance of CGI. When we want to see Wolfman fight Dracula, we want to see them physically fight. Most of the time, it just looks like cutscenes from a video game. And for a premise that sounds serious, executing it within a tongue-in-cheek manner was probably not the right way to go.
How can I ever repay you? But you can do that. You are a monk.
Well, actually, I'm just a friar.
It was the Monster Mash we wanted, but it didn't fully come together. Despite a negative reception, it did okay at the box office, but it wasn't the big numbers Universal was hoping for. A noble attempt, but at least it was better than House of Dracula. So Universal decided to attempt reviving another monster with 2010's The Wolfman. It worked for the Mummy, so why not? Well, most of the production was troubled with the original director Mark Romanek leaving over creative differences and Joe Dodson stepping in after a medley of others turning it down. You also had a major scuffle over the tone of the musical score, from rejecting Danny Elfman's material to trying to restore it back into the final cut after a failed experimental score with Paul Haslinger. And to be fair, you had makeup artist Rick Baker doing his damnedest on the werewolf effects, even if the transformation scenes were CGI. It would later win an Oscar for Best Makeup, and it was well earned. However, mixed reception and type at box office taken was the ultimate silver bullet this one took. It has slightly gotten better life on home video, and I admit to being one of the few that enjoyed this movie on its first release. It was a college date, and the theater that screened it ran The Wolfman on traditional film. And this was right around when cinemas were switching over to digital projectors. So it was a nice little treat to see a 2010 horror film projected in a grindhouse-like presentation. The overall experience is a fun ride, but I do agree with some criticisms about hiring Benicio del Toro as Lawrence Talbot. When he turns into the Wolfman, it works great. Yet when he's human, Del Toro doesn't carry the sympathetic sense Larry had in the original. With Lon Chaney Jr. in the role, it made you feel sorry for Larry's curse. Here, you kinda wish there was something more compassionate for Del Toro's take here. It's a shame it went down in the history books as a flop, and even deemed by then-President Ronald Meyer as one of the worst movies ever made. For a nice atmospheric horror movie with gore, at least I thought it was enjoyable. Well, then again, the extended cut was an improvement. So, while the monsters were faltering, there was one other thing that was doing big business at the box office. Comic book superheroes. Characters along the likes of Iron Man, Thor, Captain America, and Batman were getting so much attention. So, why not take the Universal monsters and give them sort of a shared universe like what Marvel was doing? After all, in the past they would cross over with each other, so it made perfect sense. It seemed like a good idea, it just needed better execution. The first attempt came with Dracula Untold, a prequel with Luke Evans as the titular vampire, showing how he got his blood-sucking abilities and powers. The Crow's director Alex Proyas was originally hired on, but eventually let go after concerns of the budget. For what it was, this was not a bad direction to go in. I admit it's not good, but serviceable at best. If this was the direction Universal was going to take their monsters into an anti-hero route, it seemed fitting. Okay, there are some silly things like how Dracula transforms into a wad of bats, but it was interesting to see them take the Dracula character by adding some dramatic weight between ruling his country and fighting for his family. While Dracula Untold did okay at the box office, the more interesting aspect was the speculation surrounding it. A lot of news reports came out saying that there were certain reshoots that were done to try and tie it into one big filmed universe that was all being planned. Universal Studios downplayed this and said, this isn't the one that's going to launch the big franchise we're planning. No. The honor of that springboard goes to 2017's The Mummy. And boy, were they invested in this. Highly. Alex Kurtzman, whose work includes those, was hired on along with Fast and Furious franchise writer Chris Morgan to oversee a shared universe of the Universal monsters. Dubbed the Dark Universe. Sorry. Anyway, it was utilized to present rebooted takes on the classic monsters while having them cross over or go against each other. It was not a bad idea, but the problem was that Marvel Comics' grass was always greener compared to the others who attempted to do so. We are talking about a collection of superhero movies that knew how to plan things out one step at a time. They knew how to build things up and not rush stuff, which was the total opposite here. The Mummy was set to be the big springboard, and instead of just focusing on the character, it just felt like a 2-hour trailer for a shared universe. And it only got worse when Tom Cruise was hired for the lead and had pure creative control over production. He even went as far to rework certain aspects of the movie, including hiring new writers to make it a full-fledged Tom Cruise vehicle. In hindsight, it feels that way given how little Sofia Boutella is utilized as the Mummy here. Gee, maybe if the movie was more about her, perhaps it wouldn't feel like so many scripts were stuffed into one. Honestly, this disaster deserves its own vaulting episode. There's just too many aspects to describe why it's that infamously bad here. Instead of focusing on being its own entry, too much time was spent setting up a franchise that had yet to exist and pleasing its big star. It also doesn't help that the universe was so bullish to the point it hired on various stars for possible entries, like Angelina Jolie for Bride of Frankenstein, Johnny Depp for The Invisible Man, and Javier Bardem as the Frankenstein monster. I swear, they even went as far to make a promotional group photo, which was later proven to be photoshopped, as none of the cast got together to make this publicity pic. They vouch hard, but all their efforts were for naught. Their first Dark Universe. God, sorry. Their first Dark Universe.
Which is totally absurd. I mean, who's gonna need this thing? Maybe Quinn Martin. And he's dead.
Sorry. It's just, the name's way too silly for me to take seriously. Well, it was the end of that. It wasn't the end of everything entirely. It was decided that the best route was to do a series of standalone films and hopefully, possibly, build into something. I mean, 2017 was the year Guillermo del Toro saw the release of The Shape of Water, and that would later win a Best Picture award from the Oscars. So, maybe there was some hope after all. And there was. Kind of. Blumhouse decided to take up the mantle with 2020's The Invisible Man, and for the most part, it was a nice breath of fresh air. It took the invisible concept and knew how to work it into a manner that was frightening and fresh. What if the will of invisibility was depicted from the victims, with Elizabeth Moss being stalked by an unseen entity? It truly stood to the traditional testament that what viewers didn't see was more scary than imagined. It's honestly one that is worth your time, and given the low-budgeted $7 million production, it makes this entry more fascinating compared to the overly $100 million spent on past ventures. It's a good movie built on atmosphere, suspense, and frightening ideas of abusive relationships taken to the extreme. The only problem I do have is how the invisibility is explained. I won't spoil it for newcomers, but the idea alone behind it is a little too silly for me to accept. Yet, it was a step in the right direction, and it proved to be a surprise success. And that seems to be the future from here on out. Instead of building up to one giant colossal thing that so many others are jumping onto and attempting to do, it seems that standalone films are the best possible venture. A great way to reintroduce the classics one step at a time, and, if possible, maybe do that giant event film when the time required it. Now, I could end the video right here, but there's two other movies that came out recently that deserve some kind of mention. One that was connected to said dead franchise that makes me go into a fit of hysterics, and one that had a bit of a longer production period, albeit development.
First up is Renfield, which dives into the relationship between Dracula and his bug-munching servant. The movie was retooled as a horror comedy under Chris McKay's direction, and for the most part, it's not half bad. Nicholas Hoult was a surprise fit for Renfield, and his chemistry with Nicolas Cage as the infamous Count works. You actually do believe the toxicity relationship between the two, and Hoult is an easy win to take sympathy with as he tries to create a new life for himself. Unfortunately, a good half of the script is weighed down by cop drama that, honestly, I could care less about. It just overcomplicates what could have been a simple tale between Undead Master and his servant. It's a decent rental at best, but not as bad as some make it out to be. Faring worse at the box office was The Last Voyage of the Demeter, which asked the question of what did happen to the Demeter's crew members that got munched on by a blood-sucking stowaway. Its concept goes back to 2002 when writer Bray G. Schultz Jr. wanted to do a claustrophobic horror movie akin to Alien, but with Dracula. Things stalled until 2019 when Andre Overdahl was hired to direct, and he seemed like a perfect fit given his work on adapting scary stories to tell in the dark. This movie really delivers on the horror aspect, building plenty of tension in atmosphere and effective scares. Yeah, it's a slow burn at times, but the idea of pitting characters against a supernatural entity with limited method of defense really worked. Now, if you've never heard about this movie until now, that's primarily because it had a very botched theatrical release. Originally set for January of 2023, it was pushed back to August with little promotion and played in limited theaters. Heck, it didn't even play near my local cinema at all, and that place is only 2 minutes down the street. Sure, Renfield flopped, but Last Voyage of the Demeter flopped harder. It's a pity given how slick and well made this one is. Of the two that came out this year, I'd say this flick is the better for its horror elements, but that's just personal preference.
I do hope both movies get their audience over time, given how they do something different with the Dracula lore overall, but the thing that I do hope the most is that newcomers of each generation looks upon these movies as either ways to do their own horror, or hopefully see it as their own personal enjoyment like I do. Yeah, granted there's many horror movies I could watch for the Halloween season and year-round, but there's something particularly special about these creatures that have been around for so long, influencing others and entertaining many.
Looking back at the collective of monsters Universal made over the years, it's a wonder to see how they're still around. No matter what incarnation or way they're presented to the public, the classics still manage to leave a lasting impact for any new coming audience. Every trope and cliché was found from the likes of vampires, werewolves, undead beings, and other strange things that go bump in the night. Yeah, there's other horror franchises that made their mark, but if it wasn't for these monsters, we wouldn't have these. It all goes back to the classics.
Someday, I would love to cover these movies individually with their own episode. There's so much behind-the-scenes trivia and stuff I would love to talk about that a video like this can't do justice for all of them. Yes, in today's world of horror that's all blood and gore, nothing compares to the classic black and white days, when monsters of these kinds would roam the silver screen, entertaining and scaring audiences of all ages. Yes, they are gone, but their lasting impact is never forgotten, and hopefully their legacy will carry on.
When I was a young boy, my father took me into the city to see a marching band. He said, son, when you grow up, will you be the savior of the broken, the beaten, and the damned? He said, will you defeat them, your demons, and all the
You never wanted to look beyond the clouds and the stars, or to know what causes the trees to bud, and what changes the darkness into light.
Even a man who is pure in heart and says his prayers by night may become a wolf when the wolfbane blooms, and the autumn moon is bright.
My love has lasted longer than the temples of our gods. No man ever suffered as I did for you, but the rest you may not know.
Listen to them. Children of the night. What music they make.
I'll show you who I am and what I am.
Sometimes I get the feeling she's watching over me, and other times I feel like I should go. When through it all, the rise and fall, the bodies in the streets, and when you're gone, we want you all to know we'll carry on, and though you're dead, God, believe me, your memory will carry on, and in my heart I can't contain it, the anthem won't explain it. Sends you reeling from decimated dreams. Your misery and hate will kill us all. So paint it big and take it big. Let's shout it loud and clear. Cease fighting till the end. We hear the call. We'll carry on. And though you're dead, God, believe me, your memory will carry on. Carry through the fears and disappointed faces of your peers. Take a look at me, 'cause I could not care at
A moment, my fellow viewers, before you leave. I hope that my examination of Universal's history of horror and monsters won't give you bad dreams. Thus, I offer these words of comfort. When you go to bed tonight and turn out the light, and you dread to see what is in each dark corner, and what lies in the darkest reaches of your closet, and you are truly afraid to know what really lurks in the shadows, why, pull yourself together, and remember that after all, there are such things.